isn't enough humor in the art world. Damn little humor in the art world. And if I can add a little bit more, I'm happy to do it.
This all really started because Rabbi Jonathan and I started talking about the possibility of me doing a painting for the temple. He and Rabbi Beth Singer and I met, and we had a wonderful conversation. And at that point, they suggested that a great subject would be the Jewish year and the festivals of the Jewish year. The scroll goes back there, and then it comes forward, and it turns into the huppah. The huppah is at the very center of the painting, and that's my favorite thing about the whole painting, in terms of how the imagery came together in a way I think is sort of novel. Because, you know, obviously, I'm trying to do something which avoids the usual cliches. So there are no trees of life in the old-fashioned sense of a tree of life. There are no dancing rabbis. There is a menorah, but the menorah is very discreet, and some people might not even see it right away. But there are other symbols which, for me, are a different entry point, a different way of looking at the Jewish experience.
You're about to participate in a life drawing class like the ones I teach here in New York. From time to time, I'm going to share with you some ideas about figure drawing. The rest of the time, you, along with the students here in the studio, will be drawing from the model, while I make some helpful comments in the background. Let's start right at the beginning, the way you start a drawing. Now, imagine that a sculptor has just been given a commission to carve a portrait of some famous politician out of a block of marble. He walks up to the raw chunk of marble, just delivered from the quarry. He raises his chisel, and the first thing he does is to carve a perfect little nose.
existential question, which is how do you train an artist? How does somebody go from being an art student to a productive creative artist who's producing something of interest to the cultural world of 2009? And I don't know that anybody really knows the answer to that question. And I think that we've come up with different answers ourselves as the years have gone by. And it's a work in progress. And, you know, I never really feel like we've figured it out. I don't think we ever will, but we're having fun trying.
Are we having fun?
Well, I am anyway.
Her shoulder is way further down than I thought it was going to be. And so the more you can catch yourself trying to draw what you think is there and correct it with what's actually there, the better off you're going to be.
This retrospective at the Fry is by far the most public, the most high-profile show that I've ever had.
So nobody knows why we smile or, you know, what the origin of the smile is. There's no other animal in the animal kingdom that smiles when they're happy or even close, even though sometimes we think our dogs are smiling. They're not really. It's just our projecting on it. Okay, here's our customer right there. Now, I was telling Jeff earlier that studying the anatomy of the face is helpful in some ways, and in other ways it's kind of an academic exercise in terms of the facial muscles. Because in some cases the facial muscles are so complex and so interwoven and so under individual nervous control that is capable, like around the mouth, for example. The mouth, as you can see by spending a minute in front of a mirror, is capable of being moved in just about any direction you want. I don't know that it's that helpful to know which muscle is doing this or this or this or that
You know, I mean, it's just sort of knowing the range of movements that are possible and using them as you want. The only way I got to do my book and had it have any resonance with people was to field test everything. Everything. There wasn't a drawing that went in that book that I didn't run past at least 10 people to make sure that I wasn't imagining things. And what's interesting was, a lot of times I was. A lot of times I was convinced a face had a particular expression in it. And I would run it past 10 people, and not one of them would get it right. Of course, I was wrong. They were right. They're always right. That's the problem. It's not one of these things, you know, you can't be like, you can't be the artist ahead of his time saying, oh, they don't understand me now, but they will someday. They will. It doesn't work that way with expression.
Hello, I'm Gary Faigin. Welcome to my studio.
Here's your clicker. Okay. Is this on? Can you guys hear? No. Is this on? Is this on? I have to remember my performing days. Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Joel Kostman. I'm a lifelong, not quite lifelong friend of Gary Faigin's. I met him in 1968 at the University of Michigan. We were both freshmen. Gary didn't last very long, so I didn't get to know him very well there. And we both resurfaced in New York City in the mid-'70s, which is where my real friendship with Gary began. And it has lasted forever.
And
Push it up.
And my name is Michael Kadams. I am a writer and translator. I live in Paris. And I met Joel Kostman in 1975. And he soon introduced me to his friends. A guy named Ken, a guy named Howie, and Gary Faigin, who, and we all gathered, and you can decide whether it was more like Saint-Germain-des-Prés or, you know, the cafe on Friends, but we gathered in this place at around, no, it's not in the 1940s. It looked more like that when we were there, and it was kind of fuzzy, and we used to gather there every chance we got. We had breakfast there, notably, 100 million times. And we would call each other. We all lived within spitting distance of one another. It was a few blocks away. So, anytime you were just feeling a little itchy, you would call each other up. We would call each other up, and we would meet down at the Market Diner for a cup of coffee or whatever. And it was... At night, we would do that too. Sometimes we would close the joint. It was mostly just the guys, but Pam was there too. And so was Joel's girlfriend from that time. And our lives sort of revolved around that for a long while. And
that's more...
Yeah, that's
indicative of what it looked like.
That's the 80s Market Diner. That's the one that we knew. There was a taxi company down the block. That's why there were all the cabs parked outside there all the time. That, I think, was the basis of their business. But I never knew. We told jokes, and we honed our jokes. That's what we did. We did joke doctoring all the time, and we memorized them. And Joel and I are not going to tell any of those jokes today because you can't tell them anymore. But these were the guys. They were the Beatles, right? I think I was Mal Evans, if you know.
Gary, Michael might have taken the picture, which is why he's not in it. And I apologize for the colander.
Why don't you take it from there, Joel?
Okay, so Gary is obviously standing next to me. And Ken, the bearded redhead, is a fellow artist. And Howie, in the lower left, was part of our group, and we were all aspiring artists of one kind. I mean, Gary and Ken were painters. I was fresh out of the music business and starting to write what I hoped would be books. And Howie did just about everything. He was a writer, he was a musician, he was a psychologist. He later became very famous in France, but we're not going to talk about Howie. We're
Like
gonna talk
all,
about,
like if I could just cut in it, like
Sure.
all young artists, we were trying to figure out how we could, become artists, but we were also trying to figure out how we were going to pay the rent. As, low as that rent was, I think I paid $232 a month for my front apartment at 486 9th Avenue. And why don't you tell us how you got the gig, Joel?
well, first of all, Gary actually got a commission right around this time, got a 2-year commission to make how many drawings?
600 drawings from photographs
Right.
over 2 years.
Right. And so every time you would call Gary up to say, hey, down in 5, we'll meet you down in 5, you would hear this little, and it would never stop. It was always there. And eventually,
He was talking to you, but he didn't stop drawing.
right. He would come down. He was always the last one to arrive at the market diner and always the first one to leave because he had a job. And he needed to make the money, as we all did. And Ken and I stumbled into a rather bizarre occupation to make money. We became locksmiths. Don't laugh, please, because I am a retired locksmith. Ken did it for about 7 years with me. We actually did it together because he talked me into it, and he said, you can write, I can paint, we'll make great money, we'll have a ball. And we did. Ken left the business. I kept at it for 37 years. Never stopped writing. Ken never stopped painting. And I'm going to show you this. So you may wonder why. There's a picture of Laurie Anderson on the screen with an image of a 45 that she did. It says walk the dog, but that wasn't what the record was inside, and I'll tell you the story as briefly as I can. Michael was working in the locksmith office answering phone calls, which we got jobs from this ancient artifact called the Yellow Pages. And
a very shady organization that,
Well, we won't go into that either.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about that later.
So Michael books this job down on Canal Street near West Side Highway, and he says, listen, it's the locksmith's birthday. When he gets there, maybe you could do a little something. So it was for Laurie Anderson, whom I had never heard of, because it was 1982, and not very many people had heard of Laurie Anderson at that time. So I went down, and she had locked her recording studio door, and all her masters were inside, and I picked open the door. It was like a bravura moment for me, a novice locksmith. And she and her engineer burst into Happy Birthday. And so she gave me this record, this 45, which was Oh Superman, for those of you who know anything about Laurie Anderson. It was her first record. It became a hit in England, actually, never did much here. And I went back to the Market Diner, where I told this story about this person I had done a job for, this musician I had never heard of. And Ken nodded and went, yeah, who's she? And Howie nodded and went, who was she? And Gary went, you did a job for who? I said, Laurie Anderson. He said, you did a job for Laurie Anderson? I said, you know who she is? He said, of course I know who she is. Well, Gary had been listening to WFUV, the Fordham University radio station, while he was for all those.
Gary knew everything.
Gary, that's true, Gary did. He didn't know everything. So he said to me, listen, if you ever get another job for Laurie Anderson, you got to call me. And I said, okay, fine. As luck would have it, about 3 weeks later, Laurie called back, and the front door of her building something was wrong, and I immediately got on the phone and called Gary. Hello? I said, Gary, guess what? I got a job for Laurie Anderson, and all of a sudden, the pencil stopped. I said, I'll pick you up in 5, and I drove up, and I got Gary. We drove down to Canal Street. opened the door to the building, and there's Laurie Anderson, and Gary's went like this. And I said, Laurie, this is my friend Gary. Next to the word starstruck in the dictionary is that picture. And Gary had not yet started drawing facial expressions, so
So we got a pretty long program tonight, so I'll wind this up, this little intro up. This is the apartment building where we all, well, not all of us, but where I lived and Gary lived. Howie later lived there, and Pam lived there. And it was, back then, it was like there were crack whores outside 24/7. And it was pretty dangerous, and it was very noisy, but it was great. It was wonderful. And this is what it looks like today. Now they got a Dunkin' Donuts there. And this, I'm sad to say, is what has become of the Market Diner.
the Market Diner became the Cheyenne Diner. They lifted both diners, they towed them away. They literally towed them away. And then when the Cheyenne Diner went under, it became a lot and became that.
It became this, and behind that is the, the huge Hudson Yards development that's all around the west side now.
Yeah.
And but recently I came to see Gary, and we were talking about this and that. We were talking about more important things. I had some stuff I wanted him to clear up about the past, and I asked him some questions, and he gave me some answers. And he said, "Oh, by the way, thank you very much." And I said, "What? What for?" And he said, "Well, you came to my class, the first class I gave at the Art Students League in New York, and you told me afterward that I was a really talented teacher." And the memory came back to me as he said it. I had completely forgotten, I'll be honest. But yeah, I remember being in that class. I think he was subbing for Robert Hale, and he went from easel to easel, and he looked at each drawing, and he said something helpful to every single one of those students. And I left that room, I wanted to be an artist. I mean, I'd never drawn anything in my whole life. But I left that room, he made me want to do it. He made me want to try. And I think that was one of the most extraordinary things about Gary, is that ability to communicate his knowledge and his art and his practice. But I think we're going to hear a lot more about that tonight, right?
Yeah, so in the late 80s, Michael ended up in Paris, Howie ended up in Paris, Gary and Pam ended up in Seattle, and I ended up exactly where I was, in my favorite city in the world, New York City. I'm sorry. So, thank you.
Rabbi Will Berkowitz was a student at Gage and is a former board member. Gary helped Will to see the beauty and subtlety of our world with greater depth and humility. For that, he will always be grateful. Will.
I'm okay.
49 years of marriage, according to Pamela, is like a waterfall. You start at the top and you go to the bottom. But in reality, life, like marriage, is more whitewater rafting than synchronized swimming. The river may plunge over the waterfall, but the river moves on. As Ecclesiastes writes, all rivers run to the sea, but the sea is never full. From the places where the rivers flow, they will flow again. Pamela and Gary traveled a river guided by curiosity, by creativity, and the pursuit of beauty. Gary was the eccentric dreamer, and Pamela gave focus and fuel to those dreams. Gary's life took wide curves and hairpin turns. After a stint in college in Michigan, he landed in Berkeley in the 60s, a long-haired hippie in Haight-Ashbury. He lived in a commune, and he made white glove dinners for the homeless. He was an explorer and a searcher who went on a quest to find himself. He hitchhiked on planes and trains and even a catamaran to the Bahamas, chasing a guru from India who he hoped would help him find enlightenment. When they finally met, the guru gave him some of the best wisdom Gary had ever heard. He traveled the world to hear him say, "Get a haircut and get a job." It was maybe that wisdom that led him to Pamela. Apparently, Gary did not take the guru's advice, as is clear, given what his hair looked like when he met Pamela not long after in Vancouver. Pamela was using the electric typewriter at the local radio station so she could write her life's memoirs. Now, she was only 21 years old. So I think maybe a pamphlet would probably be more appropriate for what it was that she was writing. And Gary was 25, and he was working in the room next door on a manual for citizen-led broadcasting and trying to figure out how to draw. His interests ranged from social issues to geology to ornithology. And he was the most interesting person Pamela had ever met. Soon after, Gary offered her the spare room in his 2-bedroom apartment. What he didn't mention is it wasn't his apartment, and there wasn't a spare room. But Pamela moved in anyway. Buried in his journals from that time is Gary's first drawing. It's on the bottom of the page. It's a sketch of his feet sticking out from beneath a sleeping bag. From then on, his words gave way to sketches, and his sketches to a life in art. It was art and Pamela that captured and sustained his imagination for decades to come. Gary said to Pamela, "Man, I really like you, but I'm going to art school in New York." He was frustrated by the lack of precision in the art classes he found in Vancouver. He wanted to follow the classical tradition, and Pamela decided to follow him to New York. But she was a Canadian, so despite knowing him for only 3 months, she agreed to get married, at least just for the year, so that she could join him in New York. See, as Pamela explained, it wasn't a serious wedding. I borrowed a dress, he borrowed a suit. They bought a $5 pawn shop ring. And when the judge asked for witnesses, Pamela ran out to the street and pulled 2 women from a bus stop. What was meant to be a 1-year marriage of convenience lasted for 49 years of devotion. So, on a cold December day, with a total of $200, they hitchhiked from Vancouver to New York so he could study with Robert Beverly Hale at the Art Students League. It began not only their marriage, but the fullness of Gary's art career. He found his calling. He became laser focused and gave everything to his art, eventually taking over from his mentor and teaching at the League for a decade. Despite being absolutely penniless, he would go to the Metropolitan Museum and he would donate a dime just so he could sit at the feet of the masters. Later, Pamela helped him find a way to spend a year at the École de Beaux-Arts in the Academy of Fine Arts in France, in Paris. In New York, Gary had mastered drawing. In France, he sought to master painting. The 2 of them were so poor that they never once went to a cafe, and they never turned on the heat in their apartment. During doing the dishes after 10 o'clock, when the price of hot water was cheaper. Back in New York, he and Pam lived on $2,000 a year, and they were fed by a love of art and their friendships and each other. Juliet Aristides shared a poignant observation about Gary's art. His paintings and drawings, she said, often show movement and contain a sense of danger. Plunging waterfalls, falling houses, exploding mines, moving trains. His work was filled with the beauty of exciting composition and color and form, as if he was constantly reminding us that although things can fall apart at any moment, through it all, there's life and there's beauty. It was as if for years Gary somehow had been processing his mortality, the awareness of the fragility of it all. In the days before going into the hospital, Gary was still working in his studio. Just after his death, I saw the final painting on his easel. It's of his childhood home back in Michigan. The home is small, partially obscured by an immensity of trees crowding in from all sides. It seems to show human endeavor returning back to nature. The dreamer has returned back to the dream. All rivers run to the sea, yet the sea is not full. The river roils and tumbles and winds on, and we're but a sparkle caught by the light, at once rising and fading in the mist. The French painter Pissarro wrote, "Blessed are those who see beautiful things in humble places, where other people see nothing." Gary not only saw beautiful things in humble places, he helped all of us to see all of those things as well. And our world is much, much richer for it. May his memory and his legacy be a blessing for all of us.
Thanks, Will. It just struck me when Will was talking, that Gary, in fact, was probably the most interesting person I ever met, in that you start a conversation with Gary and its depth, complexity, the amount of information was astounding, always. I did not, however, know that he looked so much like James Taylor. And I wish I had known him then, because I never saw Gary with hair like that. Kimberly Trowbridge is a visual artist and educator who has taught at Gage for almost 20 years. She's passionate about transforming the lessons of modernism into applicable tools for contemporary painters.
Oh, Gary the artist. Gary's generosity, curiosity, and earnestness are all embodied in his paintings. He maintained a rigorous studio practice for so many decades of his life, and I can't help but look at his works as these embers, these burning embers, solitary in the studio, reflecting on his life and his humanity, while also simultaneously being this incredibly generous public person who has influenced all of our lives. His works, his still lives, are anything but still. They are dynamic in terms of the way he overlaps, he stacks, he groups these objects that we might identify as seemingly mundane, but he's placing them in these inventive, imaginative contexts that allow us as the viewer, as his audience, to leap into the unknown with him, to experience the transformation of the earthly into the divine or the sacred. His still lives embody this energy for me, using dynamic shapes of light and dark and rich, saturated local colors to reel us in, and then to prepare us as viewers, as students, as friends, as colleagues. Prepare us to leap into the unknown with him, to ask questions about our humanity and our role in the community. It's with these recent works that he began making over the last several years that Gary, as a true person and artist, was deeply revealed to me, both in the exhibitions of his work at Harris Harvey here in Seattle and also in wonderful intimate conversations that I got to have with him, where these works are toggling this wonderful dynamic and tension between beauty and loss, beauty and terror, a facing of our own cognitive dissonance, where the surfaces of these pieces are luscious, colorful, the painted marks make us salivate, and yet those beautiful colors are ominous. The train is representing the Industrial Revolution, global warming, our own role as humans in desecrating this extraordinary home, our garden, Earth. And in speaking to Gary about these works and him sharing this true concern for humanity and our role in all of this really deeply moved me and let me understand his role as an artist even more deeply. And of course, as we know, he has trained generations of artists to maintain a similar studio practice that isn't just about the foundational ways of seeing something and responding, yes, very importantly, but always at the service of moving beyond into some of the deeper questions about why are we here, what are we doing, and this incredible celebration both of the beauty and of those difficult questions. These recent works of Gary, to me, really embody that tension, that dynamic, that honesty, and that earnestness of his whole person. On a very personal note, as Gary's colleague for 20 years, I started teaching at Gage 2006, right out of graduate school from UW. Gary, every step of my journey as an educator, gave me unwavering support. When Matisse died, Picasso said, "I lost my audience." And with zero shame of aligning myself with irreverent Picasso here, I, Kimberly, lost my Gary. I lost my truest witness, the one most primed and poised to understand what it was that I am putting on the table as a teacher in the context of the history of Western art. Gary witnessed me deeply. He made me feel loved and supported, and I will forever be grateful to him. And I will always carry a flame for him in my heart through every class that I teach, every interaction with my students, knowing that Gary understood and shared that gift of stitching the mundane with the divine through art making, and that stitching through arts education is the most powerful tool for connecting our communities. So grateful to you, Gary. I love you. Thank you.
That was really moving. I couldn't help but thinking, you know, I did not lose my audience when I lost Gary, but I lost my friend. And in all of the, you know, the stuff that he's done, what he's meant to so many people, all I can say is he was also the best friend that anybody could ever ask for. He was always there for me. He always answered my call. Chris Holt, Donna Lowe, and Courtney Estevanin, am I saying that right? I did my best. Chris, Donna, and Courtney are all graduates and loyalists of the Faigin Still Life Atelier at Gage. Courtney, who also holds a foundation drawing certificate from Gage, continued her studies in the Tenaya Sims Figure Atelier. Donna, who holds a certificate in children's illustration from UW, is a member of Seattle Co-Arts. Chris, who graduated from UW, where he studied graphic design, works as a creative director. They each pursue painting with the technical training and creative spirit instilled in them by Gary.
Thank you. Okay. Gary the educator. We are atelier students of Gary's. And Donna and Courtney, we had the privilege of being in the atelier with Gary both online and in the actual studio. And I just remember those days of being in the studio and being in front of the oval desk and sitting there with Gary, and we'd have such great conversations, such great banter.
Yeah.
And it was just such an amazing place to listen to him and to hear what he had to say and absorb these great teachings, as well as to pay attention to what everybody else was saying. And what he did was he taught us through not only his words, but through his actions, and through, like Kimberly had said, coming around to our different easels and giving us critiques and giving us, just dropping gems of knowledge on each of us all the time. It was amazing. And he did this through just a passion, a curiosity. You know, it kind of just wanted to explore things like art and art history and, you know, the world of art and life, really. And it was through his consistency and his thoroughness and his thoughtfulness that he really, you know, just kept us going and helped us out. He actually guided us to success, don't you think?
I do.
Yeah, I think that you've already heard a little bit about how wonderful man he is and how bright he was, but I got to know him as a teacher, and I can affirm that he was a master teacher. To me, what this means is that he knew his subject backwards and forwards, and yet he was able to communicate it to all of his students, regardless of their level of education. It was amazing. And a lot of the principles were very simple, and he repeated them over and over. As a matter of fact, I probably learned more of his crits of the other students than I did on my own. It was amazing. He was just, and he had such an incredible knowledge and depth and broad, not just in art, but in music and science. He was a real inspiration. And what I figured his goal was that he wanted all of his atelier students to graduate and to be able to continue in their artist journey, whatever it was. So he had some simple principles and things that are repeated, but he also had an work ethic that he tried to instill in us. The only thing he asked of us is we put in 20 hours minimum a week in front of the easel. Now, we also have the very special advantage of knowing Gary as an artist. He welcomed us into his atelier. He showed us, do you remember when he showed us the beginnings of his paintings? Mm-hmm. And then he would show the process, he would show his acrylic paintings, and finally, well, we got to see them on the wall. So I think that if I were to take away anything from Gary, my couple years, 3 years studying with him, it would be this work ethic. And one of the things that he taught us was, you show up. You can be tired, you can be uninspired, but the most important thing is that you have a consistent, hardworking schedule that you keep to. And that also applies in a lot of other phases in my life. How about you, Donna?
Well, there were so many incredible lessons we learned from Gary, and we had so much fun doing it. He was so contagiously enthusiastic about everything. But the lesson I want to talk about is a lesson he really never used words with. It was how he showed up for us. And the first time I was aware of this was when I first got into the atelier, and I had a show, a group show at a senior center. And I had like 5 pieces out of 50 pieces. And the night of the opening, Gary showed up. And I was so delighted and surprised. But and when he came right up to me and looked at my work, and I thought, well, he'll leave. No, he didn't leave. He stayed in the vicinity I was in and talked to people for over an hour. And I learned this lesson from that, him showing up like that, because I looked at him and I thought, this teacher is going to support me. This teacher values me. And the way it really made me feel was deeply valued and supported, and as well as being respected. My work was not at the quality, of a lot of people, but he respected it where he was, and he respected me. So what Gary gave us was he gave us respect. He gave us support. He valued us. And plus, we could rely on him. He was there for us. And there's a little saying that's, people often forget what you've said, but they will never forget how you made them feel.
So true. And, we showed up because he showed up.
That's right.
Really. I mean, and when we showed up and he was there, he not only spoke and gave us great words, but he also gave us great actions. And yet I keep going back to the wall behind us in the atelier and some of those great sayings. So I just want to talk about those for a second. They were just really, really fun, and he kind of had a way of saying it. So he would say, yeah, guys, first you mix the strings. Yeah, definitely. In reality, it's so overrated. Yeah. So just because it's there doesn't mean you should paint it. You're gonna need to, you don't need to paint that shadow. Nobody will know it's ever gone. Yeah. And then on the wall, probably one of my favorites was, simplify, then modify. And then spare the darks, spoil the painting. And then last but not least, do you guys know Faigin's Law? So Faigin's Law is really great. Faigin's Law says, if it looks right, it is right. Sorry. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Gary.
We miss you, Gary.
We love you, Gary.
Well, I'm not a painter, and I never studied with Gary. Somebody, oh, I'm so sorry. Well, I'm not a painter. I never studied with Gary. I was always aware of his influence as a teacher. And what struck me as they were talking was the following. My ex-wife and I were in New Mexico on a vacation, and we visited Gary and Pam. I don't know if you remember this, Pamela. And Gary had a student who was a Navajo and a lawyer, right? Do I have that right? And she loved studying with Gary. And she invited Gary and Pam to the Navajo feast day in their pueblo. And Gary and Pam invited me and Rebecca to join. And it was one of the most extraordinary days of my life as we went from house to house eating a feast. The one thing that no one, including Gary or Pam, told us was that we would go to the first house and eat the feast, and then have to go to another and another and another and another and eat the feast. So we filled up in that first house not knowing what we were looking at. But in any event, the point is that this woman had such admiration and respect for Gary that that invitation was tendered, and Rebecca and I were the benefit of it. Gregory Youths taught music composition and world music at Pacific Lutheran University for 40 years. His music includes 3 historical operas, an anti-war oratorio, and many pieces for orchestra, band, choir, and chamber ensembles of all kinds.
Well, I am probably Gary's most recent friend and admirer. We met online in 2023 at a meeting of Earth Creative, the global community of arts makers devoted to using the arts to raise consciousness about climate change. We joined on the same day, and so we were introducing ourselves to the group one after another. When Gary shared his images of trains crossing ice floes with no rails, or across fragile ice bridges that will certainly collapse, or trains roaring through cities dark with pollution and decay, I was enthralled. He explained to us what was already clear. The trains were symbols of human progress in technology, but also of human hubris and a pell-mell journey toward environmental destruction. The viewer finds the trains powerful and perhaps even initially exciting, but then increasingly dark, dangerous, and irrational. Now, I used to hop freight trains when I was young and immortal. I wanted to be Woody Guthrie when I grew up. And I too have a love-hate relationship with trains. I still love to hear a train whistle in the night, and I still love my memories of riding a boxcar through a river canyon or across a wide open plain and feeling that sense of speed and power and freedom. And in 2000, I had written a piece for the Auburn Symphony Orchestra, which included in the cello section one of our MCs and my former colleague from the PLU music department, Dave Beck. Well, that was a lighthearted piece poking fun at all the frustration caused by long freight trains passing through Auburn. So that day, I asked Gary if he would be willing to stay on in the Zoom meeting for a few minutes and discuss an idea for a collaboration. I told him that I thought I could see using Trains of Thought, that piece, as a soundtrack to a slightly animated slideshow of his paintings. He'd never had his paintings used in this way before, and he was intrigued, agreeing that in the spirit of Earth Creative, they might find a wider audience, and certainly more of a climate change audience, if we could post these videos online. So he sent me a folder of about 50 slides of train paintings, and we went to work. We worked by email and Zoom, as I live in Tacoma. Gary determined the order of the paintings in the video and found the challenge of sequencing them for a temporal viewing experience to be a fun new game. We had fun comparing the meanings of the word composition as applied to a painting and a piece of music, and agreed on the arc of our experience for our more or less 12-minute video. He even suggested how I might pan through each painting with the animation, since every artist thinks deeply and carefully about how the eye might move, follow the lines and spaces and colors and motives, and move through the painting. He was very good at this. I let him lead, but he was very agreeable to my suggestions about timings and transitions. He seemed very impressed with how video could lead a viewer on a journey through a painting and control what they looked at and for how long. He loved the fact that the viewer had to notice all the swirls of smoke or the mysteriously unreadable billboard signs. Well, once we completed the video, I turned to the music. I chopped up the audio recording of Trains of Thought into 37 fragments and created a number of digital pads, electronic drone sounds, that added a new, darker angle to the piece. I collaged the music together over the slideshow, adjusting the timing of the slides or the music as needed. The result was Elegy for a Mechanical Age, a title proposed by Gary. Well, it was an instant hit with Gary's and my fan clubs, and so we decided to do another one, based on another body of his work. Gary suggested that this time I write a new piece that could be played live by a chamber orchestra so that the audience could possibly hear this in a live performance with slides. He sent me another 50 slides of still life objects placed surreally in increasingly dire contexts. The beauty and fragility of these precious objects rendered so lovingly by Gary's virtuosity, standing for our beloved human culture and perched so precariously in a world so full of danger, some of it created by our own madness. Worlds Within Worlds was Gary's title for the second video, and the arc was that the scenarios became more and more fraught until the precious objects themselves seemed to be stretching, abstracting, even exploding. In the end, after one last brief and precious look at a perfect human world, the painting flatlines into its natural spectral colors, and one has to wonder if humans are even present at all. Well, I wrote the music based on an original saraband, a Baroque dance, which was my musical metaphor for the 17th century still life objects of his paintings. This tune, introduced appropriately by a harpsichord, provides almost all of the motives for the music. It, like the paintings, is light and dark, serene and agitated, and increasingly fragmented, distorted, and tortured. Upon a suggestion by one of Gary's fans on a first draft listen, they suggested that I needed to make it more intense to match Gary's paintings. Maybe that person is here today. So a second draft became more ferocious near the end, before the recapitulation of the naive opening theme and then the flatlining. Gary and I only met together 3 times. One, when Pamela served us tea in his studio, and I took him on a tour of the inner workings of a musical composition, which fascinated him, fellow teachers enjoying the similarities and differences of the theories of our respective art forms. And then the second time, when my wife and I attended a dinner at their house, and I was introduced to Gary, the passionate history storyteller, able to deliver an impromptu lecture on an obscure painter of the 17th century and how he influenced so-and-so. And finally, we met ever so briefly this past spring at the concert Pamela put on for her Music Scholarship Foundation, right here in this room. And then no more. So I will now play for you the opening 5 minutes of Elegy for a Mechanical Age, beginning with Gary looking closely at trains and ending with his attempt to stop them. And then at the end of our program tonight, you will see the final 5 minutes of Worlds Within Worlds, that show the increasing tensions as well as that brief, nostalgic return to precious human beauty right before the end.
Thank you. That was amazing. It really does. It's a new way of looking at Gary's work. I was reminded, I was in Gary's house this afternoon, and I was in his studio, and I was looking at all the model trains that he used as models for many of his paintings. And I remember the last time I was here, about a year ago, he told me about how he had won a contest when he was about the same age as Henry, his grandson today, about 6 or 7 years old. And he won a contest, and he got a story published in a magazine. and the story was about trains. I think Gary just liked to play with trains. Dave is the midday host at listener-supported classical KING, joining the station in 2013. He previously worked at KUOW Public Radio for 28 years as host, producer, and interviewer. He's also a cellist, currently principal cello in his neighborhood West Seattle Community Orchestra.
So I met Gary in the fall of 2000, working on a show called The Beat at KUOW Public Radio. Marcy Silman was the founder of that show. Marcy and I co-hosted, and Marcy recruited Gary to become our once-a-month arts reviewer. The Beat went off the air, and another show evolved out of that called Sound Focus, and that was hosted by myself and Megan Sukis. Megan was the executive producer, and she liked Gary's work so much, she said, come along on this new show that we're doing. And so we did about 12 years of interviews on the air with Gary once a month. And so that is a lot of reviews that, thanks to Pamela, they are up online. You can go and take inspiration from those radio reviews. And you'll find dozens of these monthly sit-downs that we had with Gary Faigin. I am a classical music host these days, and classical presenters and visual arts reviewers and theater people and dance people, we all have to work very hard to make sure that our work is accessible, that we are not snobbish or off-putting. And Gary was, and we've already used the word stitching here today, but I always said that Gary could weave a radio tapestry in a brilliant and beautiful way. He could figure out different strands by which we could understand a piece of art and weave those tapestries together. One example of that is a June 2009 review of an exhibit in Vancouver, British Columbia, of paintings by Dutch masters, Rembrandt and Vermeer and their contemporaries. And of course, in that review, Gary talked about brushstroke and light and shade and all the things that he knew as the brilliant painter he was. But he also talked about the socioeconomics of the Netherlands in the 17th century and how the rise of Dutch painting in the Netherlands compared to the previous century in England and the rise of Shakespeare as a dramatist. He did a little bit of reading outside of the arts. So I left KUOW in 2013 to take a job as host at Classical King. So that ended our association as radio colleagues, but it began our association as cello dads. Gary's son Ben and my daughter Leah were members of the Garfield High School orchestra cello section. So I would see Pamela and Gary and Ben, and our families would talk at those concerts at Quincy Jones Auditorium. I was thinking about that, how our music and arts worlds came together, and remembering sitting down with Gary as I move ahead to the next one, sitting down with Gary in June of 2005 when the Ring Cycle of Wagner was being presented at Seattle Opera. I attended many Ring Cycles over the years. And Gary reviewed this public art sculpture by Sarah Shea that is still in McCaw Hall lobby to this day. And it juts 35 feet up into the air. It's quite a wonderful abstract piece. I didn't really understand it when I first saw it, but I went to see Seattle Opera in recent days, Pirates of Penzance, and I looked at it again, and I remembered how Gary went into my world of music and explained this sculpture to me. It's made up of ladders, aluminum ladders lashed together, and interposed into those ladders are little pieces of backstage gear like alligator clips and tape measures and all sorts of interesting little colorful plastic cups and things. And Gary said, Dave, these ladders are like musical staffs. And Greg Hughes was referring to this, the idea of motives, of recurring themes in a symphony or piece of chamber music or in the operas of Wagner were incorporated in there. And Gary said those are recurring motifs that happen on these musical staffs. And this work was done in collaboration with the Seattle Opera Scenic Design Shop. And so the ladders and the tape measures and things like that are references to backstage carpenters and stagehands. And Wagner was a great man of the theater, so there's that resonance. So what a wonderful weaving of different disciplines and ideas and tapestries and prisms through which you can experience visual art. No better weaver of tapestry than Gary Faigin. So I will miss him as a fellow cello dad and as a radio colleague and as this great weaver of tapestry. I'm so sorry for our collective loss, but so grateful to be woven in the rich tapestry of life and art and creativity that is Gary Faigin. Thank you all.
Thanks, Dave. What I was thinking of as Dave was talking was of Gary as reviewer was this. About a year and a half ago, Pamela and Gary came to Chicago to visit me and my wife. And Gary and I spent several hours at the Art Institute of Chicago. Gary was there mainly to find some obscure 17th century Flemish painting. I really don't know. And we walked hall after hall after hall asking the guards for, do you know where the is? And we found it and stood in front of it for a while, and Gary just was in awe over this one painting he wanted to see. And then we wandered to the American wing where we stood in front of American Gothic. And Gary started to talk about the painting to me with my limited knowledge of Grant Wood's work and the fact that they were brother and sister and not husband and wife and various other things. And there was someone standing next to me while Gary was talking, and I noticed that she was turning her head and listening intently. And a minute later, there were two people standing next to me. And then someone stood on the other side of Gary. And he talked about the painting for probably 3 or 4 minutes. And then the group of 7 of us went around the corner to view Nighthawks, which is one of my favorite paintings, one of probably many people's favorite paintings, an extraordinary work. And Gary, by the time he was finished telling me all about what he had painted, Hopper had painted over in what corner, there were, I would say, a group of 12 people standing there listening to Gary's review. Barbara came to teach at UW from the animation film industry. She's passionate. I don't know, hang on for 1 second. How did that happen? There we go. She's passionate about visual storytelling, mixed media sculpture, character animation, and immersive technologies. Barbara says she didn't really pay much attention to the construction of the cardinal facial expressions until she met Gary, whom she worked with for almost 20 years.
Hi. It's a great pleasure to talk about Gary as a facial expression expert. His brilliance makes it incredibly easy. Just make sure there we go. So I want to talk about my wonderful relationship with Gary and Gary's wonderful relationship with the University of Washington Animation Capstone Program. that he was involved with since 2003, I think. I initially met Gary because through his book. I was working at Industrial Light and Magic, and he was invited to do a facial expression workshop, and there were 70 animators, and we were all entranced for hours. You may already know this, but Gary's book on facial expressions is kind of considered the Bible for animators all over the world. And one of the reasons is that he was so good at actually talking about this construction of facial expressions in a way that actually helped people develop these expressions that could be universally understood. And as you can imagine, for visual storytelling, that's a really important thing. So he actually gave gifts to folks all over the world and helped us indirectly because we got to watch what Gary actually taught folks to do, to be able to actually communicate expressions and emotion and warmth and heart. So I came, after Industrial Light Magic, I came to Seattle to work at computer science and engineering at UW, and I had no idea that Gary lived in Seattle. And so I ran into him at Zoka's, and we kind of went, and then we sat down and had a cup of coffee, and the second cup of coffee, and probably several cups of coffee. And at the end of it, we decided to create this facial expression research group. Now, this is not the group, but these are the characters that we studied. It was really brilliant that Gary was interested in studying stylized characters, as I was as well. And the interesting thing about that is that researchers were not really studying stylized characters as much. They were really interested in realism. And for the program that I'm involved with, that allowed him to have two roles. One of them was as researcher, which he was brilliant at, and also as teacher. So he taught a lot of undergraduate and graduate students how to understand construction of facial expressions as well. So we started down this road of research, and we added Linda Shapiro and Alex Colburn, who's here in the audience today, and both researchers at UW. And we worked with many, many really smart undergraduates and graduate students and investigated how to construct facial expressions that would be unmistakably universally understood. And the level of subtlety that Gary understood was I'm and the speed, the lightning speed at which he understood this was also unmatched. I'm going to show you one of the first characters we worked with, which is called Nebish. And this particular little animated sequence is of facial expressions. And Gary directed it, and the student who animated it was Devin Johnson. This was a really long time ago, but it still kind of works. So this is Nebish going through the cardinal expressions, and what I want you to notice is the way the ears move, the way the mouth moves, the way the eyebrows go all the way up to his hair, the way the eyelids move. There's absolutely nothing anatomically correct about this character. Zero. And yet, we can understand the expressions. And that was part of the brilliance of Gary Faigin. So, as a teacher, he would also come and talk to us about creating facial expressions. This is actually from the film from this year, and I'm kind of, I just found this. But Gary would always say, disgust was the most difficult expression to construct. And so we used very little disgust in our films. So that was one solution. because we did a film every year, and we used less and less disgust. But anyway, so I wanted to show you this because this student tried to actually make a goat that was disgusted. And so in addition to like how hard it was for a human, this is a goat. And so this student agreed with Gary. So if you can see, the revision was like, he didn't even know how many times he revised this. So I want to talk a little bit about Gary's newsprint drawings. When I first came to UW a long time ago, they had these very large newsprint tablets. And every time Gary would come visit, we would give him this tablet because he would just draw and draw and draw, and many people have already talked about this. And the purpose of these drawings was to teach. He was not making fine art, even though they're the most beautiful drawings, and they're so incredibly expressive. And so what we would do is, after he would come to the labs, we put his drawings all over the labs. So we were kind of immersed with his drawings. And if you ask people from that kind of time period in this program, they all remember Gary's drawings. So we were kind of surrounded by his book, which was amazing. And if you can see, it's like he had all kinds of notes for each one of these constructions. And so we had this incredible idea at the time. And the idea was, we gave him a monitor, and we gave him a newsprint, and we also gave him each one of our films that was not complete. It was about maybe 75% complete, and the facial expressions were not done. And so he would take these, he would rip off the newsprint, he'd put it on the monitor, and he'd start drawing right on the monitor. And so the really cool thing is that in order to be able to compare what he was drawing with what was on the screen, he had to tear the newsprint. So he would tear the newsprint, and if it was about something like just a motion of, or a corner of an eye, or a chin, or the location of one of the lips, he would actually, he would tear the newsprint. And then he would actually throw the newsprint on the floor, because he only had two hands, right? So he was drawing with one, and he's tearing stuff, and he's throwing it on the floor. So we were all excited, because for us, this is like, we're getting this information and feedback that's really important for our film. When I recall this, because there was no, we didn't record this. We just wrote kind of, people would sit and write every word that Gary would say, and then we would actually try to find all of these crumpled up newspapers that were on the floor. So it kind of felt like this. And so it wasn't really this, but it kind of felt like this. And so the thing that was really cool about it is it was super meaningful. But to the outside kind of viewer, it looked kind of like garbage. It looked like trash. And so the other thing is, then we would have to collect it all and put it in some sort of order, and they're all in different sizes, and they're all torn up and stuff. So it kind of looked like this. This is my recollection of this. But even though the outside observer would say, oh, kind of this looks like trash, for us, it was an amazingly magical treasure, because it was a collective view of an entire film in which he added the heart. I'm going to show you one of the booklets. We called it Gary's Facial Expression Film Booklets. So, he has even more, he's authored more books than you all may even know, because he did this for each one of our films. So people have spoken about how generous he was and how passionate he was. This is a good example. So here's one of the little booklets. And so these are the notes that the students were scribbling around and hoping that they got. And then here are examples of these drawings that were on the monitor that we were picking up off the floor and putting in order. And it worked. And I wanted to also mention that these drawings that were not ever kind of intended to be fine art, they're so expressive. and like this one. They're just really, really beautiful. And he was great at actually comparing, always, the teacher, he was comparing what was not working versus what was working, and it was quite beautiful. And then Gary got a tablet. So no more newsprint. And I'm going to show you, because it's just so beautiful, I'm going to show you 2 short clips of Gary actually reviewing on the tablet our newest film. What I want you to notice, which will be really obvious, is how little Gary needed to do and how subtle the movements were to make an amazing change. And you add all those changes up, and that's why we felt it was magical.
This is anger that's expressing itself in a physical way as opposed to a verbal way. And so the pout would be one way to express that. The eyebrow has to, more obviously engage the eye. Look at how much angrier that makes him look than the one on the left. I'm assuming he's got a broad smile here, but it's a little hard to tell. So let's just make sure. So yeah, I would have him more obviously happy in this sequence. Yeah, I like that. I'm going to try to give him a more obvious smile. So let's narrow that eye from below. So I think that's more appropriate to the moment.
I think you all know this about Gary, but there was a sweetness and kindness in the way he delivered feedback, and we all really appreciated it. So there are hundreds and hundreds of students who studied with Gary at the University of Washington, and really, he has a legacy all over, but specifically at the University of Washington in computer science and engineering. And not just the ones that actually studied to make films, but also researchers and staff people, and he touched a lot of people. And as I said in the beginning, I didn't know that much about cardinal expressions when I met him, so I learned everything from Gary. And now I know a whole lot more. So I'm going to show you, we dedicated this year's film called Scapegoats to Gary. And I wanted you to basically, it's kind of obvious, but he's the person who actually added the warmth and heart to our films, and now you know how. In many ways, but specifically how. And I'm going to show you, we want to show you a little clip from Nebish. Go back to Nebish from the beginning as circle, and how Gary helped us nail these facial expressions. So this stuff, if you do it well, it looks really easy. It's really hard. So I want to say on behalf of myself and my relationship with Gary, and also Gary's relationship with the University of Washington Animation Capstone Program, that we really miss him. We miss him in the labs. I miss him hugely. And we just, I really feel incredibly grateful that I ran into him at Zoka's and that I met him in ILM, and that he was able to actually touch so many people's lives there. So.
Thank you so much. That book is really, oh, sorry. Oh, there we are. That book is really a reference, and it has appeal, immediate appeal to every single artist. I live in Paris, so Gary signed a copy of the French translation of that book, which I have in my library at home. And every single artist that I meet who's come into my home, I show them the book, or I show her the book, and they start paging through it, and they go, "Oh, this is great. Could you lend?" No, you cannot. Kat started studying with Gary at the Academy of Realist Art in 1995, shortly after moving to Seattle to work for Microsoft. Previously, she had lived in New York, working at Christie's as a specialist in classical Chinese painting and taking classes at the Art Students League. In Gary, Pamela, and Gage, Kat found an artistic community that she's cherished for the past 30 years. Kat is now a trustee of Gage.
Between 1994 and 2015, Gary and Pamela organized and led 25 insider art tours in the US and Europe. I was fortunate to go on 2 of them. Anybody in the audience? Go on. Woo! Yay. To travel with Gary was not just to visit museums. It was to be on pilgrimage to art, the art of the great masters, to travel through time and space and place with a man with vast knowledge about art history, art techniques, and the lives of artists, a man who really enjoyed bringing others along and sharing his knowledge and passion, and who made you feel that you were standing next to the painters he loved. Velázquez, Rembrandt, Caravaggio, Halls, all those 17th century painters, as they worked on the paintings in front of them. Gary would often attract a crowd, as we see in this photograph of him at the Prado, more than 12, right? He's lecturing in front of Velázquez Las Meninas. Madrid was one of his favorite places to go. I did not get there with him. But this photograph was taken by a famous photographer named Thomas Struth and featured in an exhibition, Making Time, where Thomas Struth explores the relationship between observers of art and artworks in museum and kind of social interactions in spaces. It wasn't until 2009 when I made time to go on my first trip with Gary and Pamela. I'd known about these trips for years, and one time even met them in London when I was there in business. But it wasn't until 2009 that I actually got to go on a one-day trip to Vancouver to that exhibit that Dave Beck talked about. And on that trip, Gary literally turned me on to that golden age of Dutch painting, and I looked for an opportunity to go on a longer trip with him. That opportunity came in 2012 when my mother and I joined a 10-day trip from Vienna to Berlin. That's my mom in the red scarf in the back. And Pamela and Gary really loved to bring together this group of what they called convivial companions. They were like dynamic people who practiced art. They were painters, they were art connoisseurs, and as they called them, intellectually curious adults. And over the course of the 10 days, Pamela and Gary really fostered this community and camaraderie with the group. As we visited museums, as we traveled on trains, planes, automobiles, and we shared meals together. So I'm going to share a couple memories from this trip, all from the last day, which really highlight what it was like to be in museums with Gary and in front of paintings and painters that he loved. So on the last day, we were in the Berlin Gemälde Gallery in front of Caravaggio's masterpiece. This is Amor Vincit Omnia. And in person, this painting is huge. Well, it appears huge. It's actually about 5 feet by 4 feet, but like it looks like that to you. And Gary lectured as if the painting were really on Caravaggio's easel. And we were looking over Caravaggio's shoulder. And Gary would build up the stories of the painting layer by layer. First, looking through the eyes of the painter, he would describe the composition and, how it mirrored an earlier composition that Caravaggio was referencing, and the outlines, and building up the darks and the midtones, and then the brights, like the cherries on top, to create this dramatic spotlight that Caravaggio is famous for. And then, of course, he'd talk about the edges. He always loved the edges or the absence of edges. And then he'd help us see through the eyes of the art historian and the historian, providing that context of what was going on in Italy in 1604, and Caravaggio's patron, who was this famous banker, and he and his brother were collecting all these painters, and the brother and he didn't get along, and the brother was a cardinal, and the brother had this other painting that was of the archangel putting Cupid in its place, which I cut to save time, but just these fascinating stories of what was going on. So here we see, again, earthly love, and he has the objects at his feet, and of course, a painting that has both figures and still lifes for Gary was amazing. And so we would, look at the beautiful objects, the symbols of virtues and sciences, the lute and the violin and the book and the pen and the laurels, and the way like Cupid's little foot's just stepping right over all of them. Gary would lecture in front of every single painting for 5 or 10 minutes without notes. And one day I said, "Oh my God, Gary, that's amazing. How do you know so much?" I knew he had vast knowledge, and I'd seen his library at home with all the books, but I was like, whoa, how do you do this? And he would point at the suitcase one morning. So we were in the lobby waiting to go, and he pointed at the suitcase. He says, "See those 2 suitcases there? They're filled with art books and catalogs, and I stay up late every night studying them, so I'm ready for the next day." So I shared that story with Pamela, and she said, "Well, kind of true." And she said, well, Gary actually created these binders, every day, day by day, every museum, the floor plan, every room, every painting, meticulously typed. I bet Pamela typed them. But he did, the part about staying up late at night to study was absolutely true. So we saw a lot of Rembrandts on the trip, but this particular painting was one of Gary's favorites. And the thing about Gary is he loved the famous ones, but he would also point out the ones that weren't so famous. What he loved about this painting was the composition and the light, the way the light falls with the full left side glowing with the light falling on the Bible and the rug, and then the right side in darkness with these 2 figures emerging out. Now, Rembrandt never saw Caravaggio. He never knew Caravaggio. It was much later, but there was this group of Flemish painters that were the sort of bridge between them. But obviously, the way that they treated the light was very similar, and the spotlight on her ruff and everything. But what Gary really loved about this painting was the dynamic between the husband and the wife. The husband was a famous preacher, but the wife was very accomplished too, and he really described how they were equals. And it just reminded me, of the equality of Pamela and Gary's marriage. So Gary, in the moment, he seemed to really step in the shoes of both Rembrandt and the preacher, but he wasn't preachy. Right? He treated us like equals, or aspiring equals, and he would really elicit our observations and encourage us. "Oh, you noticed that? Oh, that's really interesting. Or what about that?" And he would get us all talking in front of the paintings, because he really wanted to share his passion and cultivate our understanding as well. So the last memory I'll call is the Hals moment, because it can't be a lecture about Gary without mentioning Frans Hals, who was one of Gary's favorite painters. Hals, the master of expression. And we saw these 2 paintings on the last day, and they're so different. This old woman, Malababa, who is sort of almost a street woman. She's old, she's decrepit, she's got this bird. She's kind of a little bit crazy. And this young boy, but the expressions and the hands and everything was what Gary just absolutely loved. And that evening we had our last dinner together, and the group was like both animated and excited, but also pretty sad because, you know, we were leaving. We'd become quite close. And so as we're discussing the paintings we'd seen that day, there was this lull in the conversation, and everybody was really wistful. So what does Gary do? This wise leader, he really knew how to manage the sensitive moment and the dynamic of the group by striking expressions from the Halls paintings. And so he just like, this went on for like a bunch of moments. And so he's just like make all these wacky faces. And there he is, like, that's my mother. And he just hammed it up with every single person in the group. And it just lightened the moment and made us just so cherish this man who could switch from being serious to being completely playful and wacky in a matter of moments. And, you know, this is me. And I'm just so grateful for Gary and the time that he shared with us and really the community that he built. You know, I have a couple of Gary's paintings in my home. It's a terrible picture, I took it, forgive it. But this one is of a still life with 8 objects that people recognize of Gary's, and they alternate between being, you know, very straightforward and just dynamic with movement. Like one's levitating, one's got steam out of it, one's like a swirling dervish over there. But this last object on the left has really spoken to me since Gary's passing. It's in my dining room, and it like looks over my shoulder now as I work and eat and everything. And it reminds me, you know, that in life, Gary always had this balance between, he was capturing like the ephemeral magic between realism and surrealism, between the past and the here and now and the hereafter. And that little urn with the halo, I don't know, it's Gary and it's giving me great comfort. So thank you, Gary, for sharing your knowledge, your time, and letting us travel through time and space and place with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kat. I got it. No kings. Okay, I'm not going to tell the Art Institute story again, so I am going to rewind a little and just tell a facial expression book story, because Pamela asked Michael and I to come and MC this with our knowledge of our friendships with Gary over the years from New York on, but this is a little further on. But my wife and I agreed to allow our 16-year-old daughter to get a tattoo. And we were living in New Hampshire at the time, where no one in New Hampshire would give a 16-year-old girl a tattoo. And my wife, being the excellent researcher that she is, found someone in Hartford, Connecticut, who would legally tattoo a large feather onto our daughter's arm. And so we drove to Hartford, outside of Hartford, found this little apartment where this guy worked, and our daughter Nola sat while he worked on her arm. And at some point, my wife Deborah and I were sitting there and looked at the bookshelf, and on the bookshelf was Gary's book. And Deborah said to me, "Joel, look, Gary's book is here." And I said, "Oh my God, I can't believe it." And the tattoo artist stopped and said, "You know Gary Faigin?" Gary's influence and fame spread far and wide. Lou Jerzik, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Lou has spent the majority of his life teaching in public schools, trying to give teens a strong footing in this world, to find strength, beauty, and inspiration to make good use of a life. Lou is recently retired, but aims to do pretty much the same thing in different ways.
Hello. So the thing about being around Gary, his work, his ideas, his presence, is he just makes me want to go to work. Sometimes on art, but usually on being a mensch. As you know, he had mad skills with paints, brushes, inks, and things, but he was exceptional at another kind of work that's been well documented here, and that is about bringing people together by being a mensch and drawing the mensch out of others. 25 years or so ago, he gathered a dozen guys who hardly knew each other and jump-started a community that has lasted through this time, will continue a long while, and I think it's the kind of thing that everybody needs and deserves, but not that many people have. Thanks to Gary for that. Oh, the slide. When we gather once a month or so, we tend to meet in a cozy place, kind of like the cabin on top of the Red Rock here. So often when we enter the space, the world feels pretty chaotic and precarious, sometimes mean-spirited. But by the end of the night, with Gary's leadership and the way he's helped us conduct our business, the view of the world changes and everything feels more hopeful. I'll never forget our first meeting in Gary's incredible Ballard studio, surrounded by his works that are in progress, still in his paint-spattered work clothes. I honestly think this was the sweatshirt he was wearing that night. I want to believe so. He talked about his father, who he greatly admired, but who, as he aged, started to fall in a sort of pit of isolation and boredom. And he wanted to be sure that night that we committed to each other to make sure that would not be our fate. As you've heard from others, he did not believe that artist was all about being about talent. He believed you became one through intention, through learning, through practice and effort. And he believed the same thing about being a community member. With Gary's leadership, that's exactly what we became, is a healthy community. We don't really have a name for ourselves. I'm not even sure we're a men's group sometimes, because what we do is talk about meaningful things, listening closely to each other and asking good questions. We give space and attention and support to everyone who needs it, kind of like the forest listening to this tree. As you might expect, we have something like a Vegas rule. Doesn't every group have that? So I need to be careful about any specific story I tell. This is a small one without much of a plot, but it says a lot, I think, about how he conducted himself on a regular basis and shows me who I want to be. About a year before COVID hit, Gary and I had a habit of walking Greenlight, and I was struck again by how incredibly observant, curious, and responsive he was to, like, everything. So I invited him to join me on a new passion of mine. I invited him to go to a place where it's too dark to see. There's nothing to hear because there is no sound. There's nobody to talk to because you're alone in a small chamber, partially filled with water that's super saturated with Epsom salt. To me, it's a heavenly kind of place that seems to have no gravity, and it's like a universe with no borders. Gary did not experience floating the same way I did. Frankly, I don't think he liked it at all. At least that's what he showed when he first stepped out of his chamber. But Gary doesn't focus on his own personal discomfort. Instead, the minute he saw me, he burst into this huge smile and said, "That was wild!" And then he asked me questions. He asked me what it was like for me. And whatever I said, I don't know what I said, but whatever I said, he hit it with an idea and a story, and we like build this this almost a new weather system. It felt like possibly it was the most important thing we could have done. As you all have showed in so many ways more eloquently than me, he made people feel important. He was good at it and did it all the time. And that's the work I want to do. Thank you for listening.
He did indeed make people feel important. I think he made everyone in this room feel important. Perhaps the most important person to Gary is this next speaker. Pamela, mother of Sarah and Ben, spent her professional life focused on creative endeavors in theater, architecture, and arts education. At the same time, Pamela enjoyed 49 rich years being married to Gary, building their shared life around family, community, and culture.
Hello, can you hear me? So I'm going to change the topic. Did you notice? Let's see what we got here. I'm talking about a rare bird. And I guess I'm talking about Gary, but I'm actually talking about Gary's world. And I met him when I was 21. I had just hitchhiked across Canada alone. If I told you I met a lot of men on the way, you'd probably believe me. And when I got to Vancouver, I did meet a long-haired hippie, someone I'd never known anything like before. But if I was thinking about looking for a life partner, there was one box I always wanted to check, and that was fascinating. So I met this guy, and he said, let's do a day trip to a San Juan island. And we're in the woods. Now, I know a robin, and I know a sparrow. The woods are filled with bird songs. And this man, young man I barely know, starts telling me what every song is, what every bird is, where they are in the trees. And I am floored. I think, I have never met a young man this interesting. And that's a chart of Pacific Northwest birds, and Gary knew every single one. So as you know, we eloped, we hitchhiked to New York. We were always on an adventure. And this is where we landed, an 1880s tenement in a fifth-floor apartment. And Gary, I have no idea, I can't explain this, said to me one day, let's go band birds in northern Canada. Sure, I know what a robin and a sparrow is. So here's the map, everybody. We're down in New York. Remember, there's no technology. It's not like he used Google to figure this out. So he somehow finds out there's an international shorebird migration research study project with a team. In the bottom of James Bay is a thumb, and that's called, the bottom of Hudson Bay is a thumb called James Bay, and we're going to go there. Okay. I have no idea how we got on that team, because I've actually since seen the regulations. We didn't meet any of them. Because you had to be a science researcher. And we took a train, and then we took a plane, and then we took a helicopter. And this is the wonderful summer of 1978 that I spent with Gary Faigin. It's the James Bay Goose Hunting Camp. No electricity, no running water. The food is dropped in once a week from a helicopter. The most prominent food that we ate was Spam and Aunt Jemima's pancakes that we called flour steaks. Our new neighbors were thousands and thousands of shorebirds. They were so happy to be where we were because this was receding glacier, till, mud, muck. They had all this stuff in the mud, and the mosquito count was 5 million per acre. They had food. They had food. Now, I brought my anorak, but it's somewhere in the lobby. I lived for 8 weeks. I'm going to stand here. Do you know what an anorak is? I had a canvas anorak that looked like what Eskimos would wear, or Inuit as we call them now. I had a mosquito helmet, and I had hip waders up to my hips. And that was my fashion for the summer. So the first thing we had to do was put up the mist nets. And I've never heard of a mist net, but what it meant was the fibers were so fine that it was virtually invisible for the birds to see. So they're coming in for dinner, and they fly right into the net, and their wings get caught, and their back of them is hanging out of the back of the net. And if we don't get there within an hour, they could die of exposure. And we have these little 3-wheeled motorcycles, or ATVs, and we are on 12-hour shifts, 24 hours a day, gently pulling birds out of nets so we can take them to the bird banding room and weigh them and identify them and band them. And then we did something pretty wild. We painted their breast feathers with a picric acid that was bright yellow, which was kind of mean because the hawks could really see it. But that was so that as these birds migrated, they nested on the Arctic Circle. They met us for the banquet before they went on the big migration. Then they traveled all the way to the southern tip of South America. Pretty extraordinary. They're like, so here were our new friends. Those were the 8 shorebird species that we were banding. The bird in the upper corner is I know it all now, right? It's a semi-palmated sandpiper. It fits in your hand. We banded over 6,000 of these sweet little birds. But I'll let you know, if you meet a godwit, is that what they're called? The big guy at the bottom? It's a nightmare. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. You're in a storm. You got to get that thing processed quickly. So it was an extraordinary summer, but nothing I had ever imagined I was going to do with my young urban life. But Gary, always the artist, started drawing the birds. And there's our semi-palmated sandpiper. So he had, he's doing his naturalist thing. But then he was Gary. Of course, I just found all these in sketchbooks. But Gary also got this idea that we were this extraordinary team and we should have our own merch. And so he designed a logo for us. And he sent this logo in the helicopter back to Moosonee, where someone printed our T-shirts. And so we could all leave the camp at the end of the summer. And we had British researchers, we had researchers from the East Coast, and we had college students. We all had our semi-power T-shirts. Well, I'm sharing this because I do want you to know that Gary was actually a naturalist, a geologist. He loved birds. And 2 summers later, I got a job in Montreal working with an architectural museum, and he got a job at a bird observatory in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and he spent the whole summer. This is just a couple of pages of the book. Of course, drawing birds and all of the other critters of the beach. So I wanted to share this story with you because in those 49 years, I saw so many different sides of Gary. But I'm going to ask you, did anyone know that Gary was this massive bird lover? Okay, well, that's what I wanted to share because he was the most fascinating man that I had ever met.
Agreed. Thank you so much, Pam. Rare bird indeed, and when I think of his rarest bird quality for me, it's the fact that he was the most loyal friend I have ever met. And his attention to friendship is what I think of as rare, because even though we all have wonderful friends, Gary took it to a higher degree. And his feelings about family are the same. Sarah is Gary's daughter and the mother of Henry, Eleanor, and Rose. Henry is 7 years old and loved spending time with his Gaga.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. I know that it would have meant a lot to my dad. For 5 years, my parents visited my home on the Kitsap Peninsula every week. The trip from their house in Ballard is at least 3 hours round trip, longer with ferry issues.
Can I get my name tag that fell off somewhere?
Even when his schedule was filled with medical appointments, my dad made the effort to visit. He held babies, read books to kids, built model airplanes. We walked on the beach, bird watched, and visited the local farm.
You should say it's fat tuna.
We made memories that will last my children and me a lifetime. I remember the last time that my dad visited. Oh, sorry, I should be moving the... There we go. It was a perfect August day. We went to the beach by my house, Point No Point, like we usually did for a walk. It was low tide and the beach was filled with fishermen. As we walked, my dad stopped every fisherman and asked them what they were fishing for and what bait they were using. His enthusiasm was disarming, and they're all happy to chat. One of the fishermen was so friendly that he gave my son an unopened fishing lure, the Buzz Bomb. It was a very generous gesture. Later, as we retraced our steps, my dad stopped that same fisherman and asked him if he had caught anything. Most of the people that we had chatted with had struck out that day, but this man's wife had just reeled in a giant sockeye, especially lucky as it was a pink run. My dad said, and then repeated multiple times that day, "See, Sarah, good things happen to good people." My dad actually believed this statement. Another maxim of his was, "You get out what you put in." Never cynical or skeptical, my dad believed that if you applied yourself to your passions and were a good person along the way, you could have a beautiful life. And I believe him too. Thank you. Is there a handheld mic? Do you want to go get the mic?
You're on.
Let's go crabbing. I'm doing this. I'm doing this too. Bobby, I'm gonna tell about crabbing. When we went to Oregon, we decided to go crabbing, and we drove there, and we just flew out a line again and again and again and again and again and again and again. Never got anything, basically, except like in our biggest batch, we got about 10 girl crabs and 2 boys. Couldn't eat any of them, well. And then we had lunch, and our favorite dish was oysters. I ran down to the dock where Gaga was still throwing them out and out and out again, and I said, "What do you want?" And he said, "Plain oyster," and he said it was delicious after I gave it to him. And then, after the last throw-out, we got a crab. And we also got a plan that we would use chicken next time. Because that would have been much better bait. And we probably know the reason why we did it. Someone was having super good luck with chicken right next to us. And we learned that there was like these things, like there were these other kinds of nets that one of them we used. It was like an unopened. What? Okay. I'm getting down the way I came up, Mommy.
I think that's an appropriate metaphor. This is the... Michael and I would like to thank Pamela so very much and thank all of you for being here. Thank you.